Very pleased to welcome Goran Fercec from Croatia, a Citizen Exchange Council Fellow in Residence at the University of Kansas and a guest at CREASE, of course. Goran will talk today on the topic of Croatia never-ending transition. Goran Fercec, as I said, is the CEC Artslink Fellow in Residence. He was born in Koprivnica, Croatia in 1978. He's an author, playwright, and theater maker. He graduated from the Department of Dramaturgy at the Academy of Dramatic Arts in Zagreb. His novel, There Will Be No Miracles Here, was published in 2011. The novel gained a place on that year's 10 best novels list compiled by the Croatian Ministry of Culture. The novel was also shortlisted for all relevant literary awards in Croatia and has been translated and published in the Republic of Macedonia. In 2015, Goran Fercec published a book of essays titled Handbook for Yesterday, 13 Essays. In 2011, at Zagreb Youth Theater, his performance text, Letter to Heiner Müller, directed by Bojan Djordjev, had its premiere, and the performance was subsequently presented at La Mama in New York in 2012. The Croatian production of a play Workers had its premiere in Zagreb Youth Theater in June in the season of 2016-17. For his work, Goran Fercec received the following awards: Award of the Austrian Cultural Forum in 2007, of the Croatian Theatre Award in 2014, and the award of the Borsnik Festival in 2014 and 15. Goran Fercec is currently writing a novel he describes as an anti-biography of a working-class woman in a small town, and this novel is planned to be published in 2018. His drama trilogy collection titled Workers will be published this year by the Fraktura Publishing House. Goran Fercec has participated in residencies in Graz, Ljubljana, Skopje, and in Kodrojko in Italy, and in workshops throughout Europe. Thank you so much for coming to visit us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I would like to thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to have such a broad audience. I'm not being ironic. I mean, the crisis that the culture and the idea of thinking is going through, not just like in Croatia, but I think worldwide, is really something that I think that needs to be addressed, and that's why I'm really thanking you for coming here. This supposed to be lecture in a way, and it could have been a lecture, but I'm a writer by my profession, and instead of giving you a lecture, I decided really just to give a short intro and then to read you from the mentioned book of my essays, Handbook for Yesterday. One of the essays that I find to be crucial for the topics and the subject that I'm working last couple of years and also working at the moment here. The essay is titled "Workers Leaving the Factory." It's not long. It won't take your time, and maybe just a short intro. What were the reasons really to write these essays and many other essays in that book, other 12 essays? And this is really like the current situation, not the current, like the situation of last 25 years in Croatia, or the Balkan in general, not just Croatia. And this is the I would call that situation the state of exception in a way. I called it the state of experiment in a way. So why do I do that? In a way, in a short, the history of the Balkans. I think you know enough just to be aware of what I'm talking about. But so there were the Socialistic Federative Republic of Yugoslavia after 45 until 1990. In 1991, the war began, and it lasts like 4-6 years. The war was spread through all the Balkan states except Macedonia and Slovenia, but Slovenia at the beginning, but except Macedonia, and it had, I think, a really great effect on the time afterwards, the time after that. So, in the first phase, there was this. In the first, I'm not now talking about Croatia. So in the first phase of these 90s, there was this bursting of a national pride during the war years, and then nothing else was really matters. So the society was built up with no any social context, but exclusively by the idea of national and nationality and the importance of that topic notion. Then ended, and after that it wasn't possible anymore to build up from the same point. The society saw what happened, then started this period of economical growth, economical rise, which was really in a way connected with the incredibly big credits that were took from the international banks and so on and so. So the situation was building up as a health situation, but it really, in economical and social sense, it wasn't. And that was, I mean, that period lasted until the beginning of the early 2000s. And what happened during this period was a real important change of the government from the democratic Christians, or HDZ, as we call it, to the socialistic government that had almost 2 mandates of a government. And after that, in a way, in the last 2 years, I would say everything completely collapsed. So what happened is that the socialists that came to govern, in early 2000s, did the same thing as the Demo-Christians did, in the 90s. I think even worse, because they in a way betrayed also the people who believed in the socialistic values. And what happened is that they just prolonged the politics that HDZ started, all the time trying to explain that they're really doing something different. But when everything fell apart, it was obvious that it was just like a saying. And now, from the 2 years back, we have, I think, the worst situation that's from. I think it's worse than at the beginning of the 90s. I think so. In the last elections, we had the new government, which is the same Demo-Christians, but slightly going right. And then that government fall apart because it was like coalition of like impossible ideas. Then it fell apart, and then it fell apart, and then the new government of the same caliber and the same frame was chosen in the last year, and now it's like a year almost of that government, and like political and social situation is completely dark. So we have this revision of the history, the incredible revision of the history that really started in 90s, but I'd say it started in 90s because of the time of the state of exception. It was war, and it was some kind of a fuel to build up this feeling of the like nation. But today it's a pure like a political trade, I would say. But I mean, it's really serious, it's really dangerous, because for the people, it's not just a political trade as for the politician is, it's in a way their right really to revise the period of between 1941 and 1945, during which we had a fascist government, and on basis of which, I would say on poetics of which was built the contemporary state. There are many problems today, as you can see, and one of the great problems is that the state is falling apart because it just like the unemployment is around between 11 and 14%. We are 4 million people country, and there is like between 200,000, 300,000 unemployed people. There is almost one employed people for one like pension people. So it's completely it cannot really stand in a way. And the topic that I started to develop during this last couple of years, is really the topic of working class and workers, because I think this is a topic that had the biggest change in this transition between socialism country to the neoliberal capitalistic country, which never really happened in a way. That's why we can talk about it later, I call this lecture as a never-ending transition. So I did a couple of things regarding the topic of working class and workers. As I said, one is the book of the essays, the Handbook for Yesterday, or Priručnik za jučer. It was published by Fraktura, and this is I can also later tell you the anecdote about this photo after I read my paper. I also started in a way with the first novel, this topic, that was published in 2011, and this year, as Justina said, there will be a book of plays, dramas named also like workers. So it's a topic that goes through all my work and all different medias that I'm researching. I will now read one from essay, the whole essay from this book. Thank you to the fantastic translation of Steven and Dick. Really good. I didn't recognize it. It was mine. It was that good. So, essay from the book of essays, Handbook for Yesterday. The title is Workers Leaving the Factory. In 1989, my mother was 35. She had 2 children, one in the 3rd grade and the other in the 4th, a husband, and a full-time job in the Izvor supermarket, store number 66, which the locals call the farm market. The store was located where Mishkinina and the Ledinska streets ran into the erstwhile Republic Square, or Square of the Republic, in the heart of Koprivnica. She worked 2 shifts, 1 week in the morning and next in the afternoon. Every other Saturday, she worked the morning shift. She walked to work, 3 kilometers there and back. The store was that far from home. She needed just over 20 minutes to get there. Depending on her shift, she would make lunch before she left for the work or after she got home at 3. She laundered her white overcoat twice a week, and after giving it a good ironing to the point of an almost starchy stiffness, she carefully folded it lengthwise, put it over her arm, and carried it off the work. Her overcoat had to be clean and ironed, like a physician's. She worked in the deli section, and her work basically amounted to slicing salami, making sandwiches, selling bread and canned food products. At that time, they still used analog scales, and so after slicing and the salami, my mother weighed it by hand and would then calculate the price of those 7, 8 or 9 decagrams of bologna, multiplying the decagrams by the price of a kilo with a pen on the greasy paper, which she would then use to wrap up a sandwich she had made. On an average day, she had to make more than 300 calculations without a calculator. There was no time for punching the buttons. During the mid-morning break, there was a line of workers from the nearby Sloga shoe factory that stretched out the door of the store. She never got nervous, never made a mistake in calculating the price, and all the workers would get their sandwiches and yogurts on time, so they could get back to producing shoes. Besides slicing salami and manual calculations, my mother's work consisted of carrying 50 kilos sack from one place to another, moving crates of mineral waters and beer, stocking the shelves, and annual inventories, all done by hand, without barcode readers or computers. At the store where my mother worked was one of those where you could buy anything, from cord buttons and tapestry yarn to detergent and cattle feed in bulk. In the exhausting fusion of that socialist shop, which brought continual profits even as inflation sapped the value of the currency, my mother, just another cog in the machine, was happy. And that is why I'm writing this text, because of my working mother. A store worker with a high school education, schooled as were generations of the late 60s, who worked her job in the store number 66 behind the deli section refrigerator and in front of the shelves of loaves of bread. Happily, without ambition. In the late 80s, during the best years of her life, they offered her the position of manager of the store. She spoke to my father and refused. She was content with what she was doing and did not wish to have any more responsibility than she needed for the salami. On the other hand, she felt secure because the system was such that it allowed a saleswoman with a high school education to advance in the organizational hierarchy of a small store selling everything the socialist person needed, except fruit and fresh meat. there was no fruit and fresh meat in the store. I stopped in at the store before and after every session of school, spoke to my worker mother, watched her briefly as she worked, and, depending on her schedule, went home with her or alone. Watching my mother work created in me a sensitivity to the image and idea of working women and men, which started coming back to me and resurfacing in my mind after the increasingly frequent worker strikes of the last several years. Strikes that were direct consequences of the privatization of the 90s and that brought a cessation of manufacturing and the degradation of general collapse of the system of work. My worker mother somehow managed to navigate her way to the new circumstances, resisted privatization, struggled together with her co-workers for unpaid wages, participated in strikes, sleeping in department store warehouses and shops. Throughout her entire working life, she had stayed in the same store, which did not change anything but its shelf arrangement, name and owner a few years before its final collapse. Because of those changes, the only permanent item in the inventory was my mother. She alone had remained of all the workers' collectives with which she had shared the workdays. It is possible to attribute her lack of options in part to her character, but in part to her conviction that no system would betray the basic component on which it depends, its workers. She was wrong. Her working discipline, her love for her work, and her belief in the system, all of that was betrayed in the early 2000s. After months of unpaid wages and undeposited contributions, after who knows how many owners and workers collectives, the store shut its doors in the late summer of 2003. And my mother was transferred from her job to the unemployment office for early retirement, to which she then made additional contributions so she might reach the years of service required for her to get a more or less decent pension. After she had paid the additional money, adding her remaining years of work to the account, obey the law and formally become a retiree, she received first retirement payment to the amount of 1,480 kunas, which is around $230 per month. From that time to the present day, that amount has not increased. On the day that she left work for the last time from the morning shift, I came by car to pick her up. I waited out in front of the store. Unimportant though it may have been, I remembered that the sun was out that day. She came out with her white overcoat in the plastic bag and her Borosana shoes in another. That was all that she had after 30 years of work. There was no cardboard box full of stuff from her desk and photos of her children and husband, because there was no place for a desk or other items in her job, nor was there any space for anything of a private nature. And when she came out of the store with her co-workers, and after she locked the door of the bankrupt company, making sure it was locked with a routine push as she had always done, my worker mother began to cry. At first, I thought she was squinting in the bright sun. Then I saw tears and heard her sob. Her co-workers tried to console her with sweet remarks about how she would feel better at home. Her crying struck me as stupid. I really believed that there was no reason to cry for a job in a system that had forgotten its workers. Neither then nor years later could I understand why my mother wept on her last day at work. I do not think that I know now, but it seems to me that her tears that day were tied to something greater than her job, greater than the fact of being a worker, greater than nostalgia, to something irrevocably lost and connected to a happiness that arose from a treat memory of dignified work, freedom, and a feeling of being worth something. Here I will end the story of my worker mother. Though the real tragedy of workers in late capitalism does not begin until after the end of the story that I have told. After retirement, after the system of the safety net and workers' rights has shown for the 1000th time that there is in fact no system, no safety, and no rights.
No what?
Rights.
Rights.
Rights, yes.
Sorry.
No problem. You can interrupt me, of course, anytime. It's precisely for the aforementioned reason that the performance text that I wrote in response to a commission by the Fringe Ensemble Theatre Collective in Bonn deals with workers, or with workers who no longer have jobs. The image of working women and men without jobs, without factories, without paid work has been a hallmark of the last 20 years of our history. Working women and men have paid the price of late capitalism's cold opportunism. Its price has been paid by those who made manufacturing happen, those who, because of their faith in the system, agreed to everything, to be exploited, used, underpaid, exhausted, and, in the end, to being let go. In the late September of 2013, the working women of the Kamensko factory marked the 3rd anniversary of their hunger strike, when 90 of them had decided to send a radical warning about the problem of unpaid wages and months of working for nothing. In 2010, they spent 8 days in a borrowed tent on a French Republic Square. They received municipal and state emissaries and waited to receive months of unpaid wages. The marking of the anniversary has coincided with a strike by the working women and men of DTR, another large textile plant, who 3 years after the Kamensko strike and after striking for more than a month and struggling for the same ends to receive unpaid wages, for they planned to start manufacturing again so they can return to their jobs. The latest event of this kind, but probably not the last, are 200 working women in the erstwhile Borac textile factory in Zenica in Bosnia, who lost their job 4 years ago after the factory declared bankruptcy. The bankruptcy proceedings continued for 3 years and result in the liquidation of their factory's property, but without providing funds for the remedy of the workers' lost wages. The working women are now carrying on a hunger strike in front of the court of Bosnia and Herzegovina. There are countless examples, and probably more unpaid working men and women and unpaid work hours. millions of hours of work without pay. When the Bonn Theatre Group Fringe Ensemble formulated the main theme of the project as the fairly abstract question, where is the new front? It only took me a little while as a cultural worker to figure out that the new front is where I had thought that crux of Europe's transition lies, in privatization aimed at the extinction of manufacturing and the liquidation of factories, the direct consequences of which are deserted factories, empty workplaces, and workers without jobs. So, the new front is the old front, the never smoldering workers' front. The struggle for the right to work, the struggle for dignified and paid work. In March of 1895, the Lumiere brothers filmed the first version of their movie, Workers Leaving the Factory. The first public screening took place in Paris later that same year. It is assumed that none of the filmed workers attended the screenings of the movie. If one were looking for the paradigm example of cinematic art spurring a critical theory of labor in the post-industrial era, among various and sundry examples, one would probably have to choose a 50-second sequence of the Lumiere brothers' first movie, during which an organized throng of workers comes out of the gate of a factory after a work shift. It is impossible to ignore this movie as the herald of a new beginning in the conception of the work in the era after the founding of the First and the Second Internationals, of the rebellions that strived for improvements in the standard of living of workers, for better working conditions, reduced working hours, and the cessation of the exploitation of workers with the aim of increasing productivity in the 16-hour workday. I end this text with a Lumieresque image of the working class of my youth, which was repeated countless times every workday between 3 and 3:20 in the afternoon. A fairly trafficked street on the outskirts of a provincial city leading to the Hungarian border. I'm standing at the fence and waiting for my father to come home from work. I'm actually waiting for hundreds of cars and bicyclists to appear in the distance. Workers on their way home from work. Their column resembles an organized procession of a direct movie scene, though the only thing that is organized in that procession is the fact that all those people are workers. I dedicate this sequence of my silent film to all the working women and men of my childhood who are no more. Just as the store in which my mother worked is no more, as the Sloga shoe factory whose workers came for sandwiches to my worker mother is no more. Thank you. Thank you. It's much better translated than I read it. You must be.
Interesting how that the parallels of what went on in the post-Soviet era, or the end of the Soviet time, is sort of the sort of the narrative that we're hearing now in these areas like West Virginia and these, the industrial towns, because that kind of anger at being kind of like abandoned and the system's not working is not just limited to, Croatia. And when you started, in 1989, my mother was 35, and then I'm writing, and then in 2003, I was calculating how old she was, and I realized she's exactly the same age as me. So 2003, I was too young to retire.
Yeah, imagine that.
So did she retire?
Yeah, of course. She's like now retired and still getting this pension of $230. And I mean, I must say to you that the food is cheaper here.
Yeah. Oh, no, I understand that.
It's better and it's cheaper.
And clothes are cheaper here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but somehow you can like calculate with the clothes, in a way but with food you cannot do that in a way. So, it's like I mean, my mother is in a way like in a sharing the life really with my father in a way that they cannot live with each other in a way because they depend on each other in that way that in economical way, of course they're still in love, but in economical way that it's like she would not be able like to live without it. It's like the question, and for example, I always ask myself, what if something happens to my father? This is something that, of course, I think about it. Then I like ride the bicycle just to get rid of that thought because it's something that I don't know really want to do with that. But I mean, there is you mentioned the industrialization. I mean, and the industry for in like Soviet era, but also the Yugoslavia. You must know that Yugoslavia, like after the Second World War, so. After the 1945, it was like a rural country. It didn't go through the period of modernization until 1945. It started after everything started after the war. We didn't have nothing. It was like a land of peasants and cattle and like nothing really. And then came like after the Tito, and then came like the socialism, and then in '49 the Tito cut all the connections with Stalin and started to develop this country that you all know, like which is now so criticized as being like a dictatorship country, and so I don't have any like this intimate feelings toward it. I'm like really being realistic and rational, and like towards that to that history, and I know there are great minuses like in the same time, but from 1945 until the in middle 60s. This country was completely industrialized, completely modernized, not just like the production, but the living itself, the quality of the living, everything that I mean the new man needed in a way. So and that was something that we, like in the 90s, that is something that we inherit in a way. We inherited that production because with these industries, and of course in the 90s happened the only possible thing that could have happened, and that was the privatization of that industry. So they were like, you have a government, that the people in government, they have a good friends, and that good friends, they need like factories, I mean, to use them up, to ruin them, to close them, and take the money. Like, I mean, when I say take the money, I mean it's from taking money from where? From selling the property on which the factory is. It's that cheap, like selling the property to the chain of the Western hotels chain or something like. So it was like, and without really having a program, what to do with, I don't know, with 2,000 people that work in that factory, really like. So the city where I was born, this is this city Koprivnica, which you all know not by name, by the product, and this is this Vegeta product, you know, this thing that you put in the food to make it taste better. This is the terrible product, of course, but it was. I don't use it. Like, I'm from Koprivnica, but I'm the only, I think, guy that does not use this Vegeta because it's a terrible. It's complete chemistry. Like you add in the food to make it.
You know, I just
Yeah.
saw it in this European Delight
Yeah,
over
of
in
course.
Parks.
Yeah.
They're still producing it. Huh?
It's the main like export product
Yeah.
in the of course. I mean, this Vegeta, Vegeta is from vegetables because it's basically dried vegetables. So we also have the street in Koprivnica of that lady that invented it. She was a chemist, like, and she was really interesting because and it doesn't matter. There is like all this anecdotal history of my life in Koprivnica. But what I wanted to say, but this product also, like, which was developed in the late 40s, beginning of the 50s, was also like, it was. In a way, like a sign of this modernization. It was like I'm saying that because I would like you to realize how deep and overwhelming was this modernization and industrialization, from the small things up to the great things related to the culture and so on. Because every city had to have the house of culture, even the smallest one. So, and I mean, for me, the house of culture was the first venue in which I connected somehow with the theater, and so on. So it was in a really good way organized modernization.
So your dad still was working at his factory? His factory wasn't closed?
No, his factory wasn't closed because it was privatized. Privatized, but it was ideal because my father worked in something that on what the city was dependable. Yeah, dependent. It was like the city, like the gas and the water. Headquarters. So he worked there, but it was like privatized. So it got into the hands. But now it's falling apart because this is the level of the privatization. It was like it has the phases. For example, there was a state, for example, factory. So like my father's like industry, and then they would privatize the whole thing. And for example, it was the industry consisted of like the gas, the water, I don't know the third thing, like the garbage disposal, and then they would privatize the water itself, then the gas, then so it was complete. It was throughout, and it was like, and it's still going on because there are always these new friends, government friends, who needs like the money. So it's and I will start here. Yeah, you can ask the questions. I'm open for. Thank you very much
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.